We got a packed agenda, so I just want to thank you all. And if amenable, and if you can, please turn your camera function on instead of being off. So if you can, again, if you can, please turn your function on. All right, Rick.
Great. Well, thanks. And I know we haven't met in a while, and there's a lot of interesting things that have gone on, including the election and interesting world that we live in. But one thing I did want to make sure everybody understood. So in the last meeting, I believe it was the last meeting, I put out some data and we sent it out to everyone. It was Camden data about what was going on with our markets and evictions and what have you. And we have to be careful with data that it's properly noted as to what the data really is. And so I asked my Houston team or my sort of corporate office to give me data on evictions for Houston and in Camden's 9,000 unit portfolio. And they gave me a schedule that I sent out to everybody, and it showed on average about 50 to 60 evictions per month. And I thought that was high because I thought the number was very much lower than that. And so it turns out that the data they gave me, which was inaccurate, and the data actually was for my entire 57,000 unit portfolio of Camden. So it wasn't just Houston, it was everything. So that turns out to be less than 1% when you get down to the bottom line. So I think that that it really shows, number one, you better watch your data. And number two, that properties that have an average income of, in my portfolio system-wide in 14 markets in 9 states in the District of Columbia, the average income of a Camden resident is a little over $100,000. So it shows that if our eviction rates during normal times are less than 1%, it shows that the evictions are really not in that category of properties. It's in the category that we know is the most vulnerable, and those are people that are making. It gets to the unemployment numbers where when you think about the 11 million people that haven't the jobs that haven't been added back. 5.8 million of them are $45,000 and under, and then the next big chunk is $75,000 and under, or 71,000 and under. So what we are really studying here is evictions that are really happening to the most vulnerable people, and the middle part of the country, and the people who are making those kinds of monies are actually doing really well and are not and don't have big eviction issues. If you look at my 57,000 or 58,000 units system-wide, we have a total of 155 CDC declarations out of 58,000. And the interesting thing about the CDC declarations is that we think about half of those are basically people who have the money but won't pay their rent. And so what we're all about, I think, at this task force is really understanding where the vulnerability is and how do we help the most vulnerable people, and not this broad. We're going to have people that live and that are making 100 grand a year. They're not getting evicted, trust me. And so I just thought we'd start the meeting with at least me clearing the data up and making sure that we are careful with data, and we should be focusing on the most vulnerable people. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. Stephen, do you have anything to start with? Maybe.
Okay. Yes. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining. Just to do a quick run through and overview of what I think is going to be a busy agenda. We'll start with Jeff giving us a lay of the land of what's been going on locally with findings. Sophie, I think, is going to be able to update us on some really exciting new initiatives that have come out of the County Commissioner's Court. We then will have Donna and Amanda and Jeremy tell us a little bit more about what's going on with the eviction diversion program. Renee, and I think that unfortunately Cynthia could not join us, but Brad will be giving us an update on what's been going on with the 2 county programs. And then we will then have, I think, a wonderful presentation of thinking about our work within the context of the national work, which has been being watched and sort of coordinated in some ways by the folks at the Eviction Lab. And so Peter Hepburn from Rutgers, who is a fellow at the Eviction Lab, will be presenting to us there. And then time permitting, we'll give a little bit of an overview of other work that's been going on since the last time we met and looking ahead to what's on the agenda for the future. So a lot to pack in over the next couple of hours, so appreciate everybody joining. So with that, I will turn it over to Jeff.
All right, well, hi, everybody. Let me see if I can share my screen here, and I'll just give a brief update about where eviction case filings in JP courts are going and where they've been over the last couple of weeks. Assuming everybody can see my screen now. Basically, case filings are still steady. We're not quite sure what the combination of pressures are to keep them steady, but they're averaging around 100 cases filed per day. There is a slight 7-day uptick in case filings, so it's not out of the bounds of what we've seen throughout this pandemic. So I think that we're still well within the bounds of where we've been since March. There is a lot of concern about the holiday season. Typically, seasonally in Harris County, year over year, we're in a low point for evictions. It's not a super low point. We're usually down by about 30% over our high points over the summer. Those evictions seasonally typically pick back up in the spring. And I think that something that we should watch is our seasonal trend and how we perform this year, given all of the economic pressures and the knowledge that in all likelihood, there won't be additional federal government support until the spring. So I think that this is as good a news as we could expect right now, that our trends are staying the same. And in terms of the docket, I just did a quick count just now before the call, and we've got over 2,200 cases on the docket. And over the next week, which includes Thanksgiving, so an abbreviated week, we've got 208 eviction cases on the docket. So while there's relatively average to good news that our cases filed are steady, bringing that home and knowing that there's 208 cases pending prior to Thanksgiving is a lot. So just wanted to share that. Does anybody have any questions on these numbers?
Looks like we do have a question in the chat from Donna about reporting on the rate of tenants represented by council. If you can have it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me share a different screen that I have here and just make sure that I've got this open here. Maybe it is the same screen. So in terms of tenants representing themselves over the last 2 weeks, or let's say since the beginning of November, we're looking at over 95% of defendants are representing themselves, and a little over 4% are assisted by attorneys, and that's for the month of November. Forgive my dog, he likes to bark. Are there any other questions? Well, great. In that case, thank you for your time, and I'm looking forward to Peter's presentation later. I can't wait to see what he has to say.
Great. Sophie, the floor is yours. Hold on.
And Sophie, you may need to unmute from your side.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Great, okay, hopefully my Zoom will not just end like it did in the middle of a presentation I was giving yesterday, but if I go into the ether, it's not on purpose. It's really nice to see a lot of familiar faces and to meet some of you virtually. I work for Commissioner Rodney Ellis at Harris County, and we are so grateful for all of the work that truly everyone on this call and many of your colleagues have done for years, but certainly for the last few months in trying to keep people housed. I have a few updates. They won't be new for some of you, but there might be people who know some pieces, but not all pieces of what the county is working on. And honestly, I may not know all pieces. And so if others have information, please feel free to share. But I did just want to go over a few things that have happened or are in progress at Harris County. And Maria, I think, is on this call. Yeah, she especially can correct me if I'm wrong on some of the things that her department and community services is involved in. But the first thing is that at the last real commissioners court on November 10th, the commissioners voted to support the Housing Legal Services Initiative. That's what the Eviction Assistance Coalition that Lone Star and 4 other organizations are a part of have been, I think y'all formed this summer, right? Or I know you've been working your butts off together since this summer at least. So that will be, at this point, it's $1 million of funding for those 5 organizations collectively. Lone Star has graciously offered to be sort of the convener for the county point of contact. But it's really exciting that it is a true coalition effort, and also means that the initiative can cover clients who are income eligible regardless of some other restrictions that some organizations have, but maybe others don't. This is in no way a promise, but I will just say the conversation at Commissioners Court was encouraging. I think that because of all of your efforts, there has been an increased recognition that $1 million, which this summer seemed exorbitant, now we know is not going to be enough. And so I think I am hopeful that we can put more into funding legal services. I think that the numbers that Jeff just presented, as well as anecdotal information that we're getting from people who are watching court sessions and just observing that outcomes really might be different if there was a lawyer present to raise arguments or to tell someone, just bring these papers with you because they actually will really help. It reinforces that having counsel can be helpful. So that's one thing. Another thing is that the county gets CDBG CV funds, and we got another allocation. And this was very exciting that our community services department recommended that of our latest allocation, $4 million be put toward eviction prevention generally. That can include a bunch of different things, but among that would be legal representation, rental assistance that goes beyond the CARES Act period, as well as resource portals, potential evaluations of these programs and studies on how we can be more effective. And I think just generally efforts that y'all think could fit under eviction prevention before there is an order that someone has to leave their home. And that's the initial allocation. Nothing within that. There's no specific number, unless Maria wants to correct me, for a certain amount for rental assistance or a certain amount for a collaborative resource and information hub or something like that. But it's my understanding that a number of folks on this call and not on this call are trying to strategize together about how we can effectively reduce the burden on tenants and get people connected to the resources that they needed to. And Maria just said not aware of specific amounts. So great, we're both on the same page and not knowing. And then the last thing I wanted to mention at this point is, and Judge Brown can maybe speak more to this, but our Harris County Law Library and Lone Star have been working together on Donna, I'm not sure if you are specifically the point person on this as well, so you could also maybe speak to it, but working on like a legal resource kiosk at not necessarily in the justice courts, but functionally like co-housed with where the justices of the peace hear cases, because those are the county annex buildings generally. And even beyond Lone Star's work, I think this has made the county law library much more interested in having kind of these annex sites for relevant information for tenants facing eviction or for other types of cases that people might encounter when they're at justice courts, which is really exciting and I'm pretty sure would not have happened but for people on this call like catalyzing and saying, hey, we think we can do something about this and take advantage of these spaces and meet people where they're at. So those were the main things I wanted to go over from the county side. A lot is still in development. We're really appreciative of all of the work that y'all are doing, and you can certainly reach out to me directly if you have questions or thoughts. I also think there are a number of people on this call, and certainly, Donna on the legal services side, Lisk on the like collaborative efforts, thinking through all these things before people actually end up in a court situation, including many others who I'm just not going to go into all the names who are coming up with great ideas and actually how to implement them, which is especially wonderful. And so we just really appreciate everything. And I hope that these collaborations go on longer than the pandemic does. Thank you all.
Anyone have any questions for Sophie before we switch and get an update on the eviction diversion program? Okay, so Amanda, why don't I turn it over to you and I'll let you coordinate between all the players that are going to update us on the eviction diversion program. Claire will unmute you and then you need to unmute your phone.
Okay, I think I got it.
Oh, wait, sorry, I messed up. Yeah, I just got a cue that I missed something. So we're actually going to do a quick sharing of a news video that was on one of the local stations, just to give folks some background, and then Amanda will pick up. We're not getting sound. Elaine, we're not getting sound. Okay.
Elaine, it might be because you're muted still on your end, or you're talking, but we can't hear you, so.
Oh, let me.
There you go.
Can you hear me? Okay. So let me restart. I have two videos to be able to share the sound. So give me 1 second to restart over here. And okay, let's see.
It was a shock to see this, but many landlords turned down up to 6 months of rental assistance, turned down up to 6 months of rental assistance because they say it's just.
We're not seeing it now.
Families.
Not seeing it.
I'm not sure what's going on.
Okay, maybe start it over, Elaine.
It's hard. Okay.
Would a landlord agree to accept the rent?
I'd say let's scrap it. Let's scrap it. We can't hear it. The sound's bad. Let's just move on directly.
Turned down up to six, just coming too late. But that was.
We'll send out the link so folks can watch it on their own, and we'll just go ahead and turn it over to Amanda.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I am Amanda Shelton. I'm the Director of Client Services at GCCSA, and we are the administering agency, for the Texas Eviction Diversion Pilot Program. And so I will share my screen briefly, just to give you a quick overview of kind of our efforts so far with the TEDP pilot. And also what we're planning to do in the future as well. So with the Texas Eviction Diversion Pilot Program, we have received $600,000. The purpose, of course, is for tenants and landlords to access 6 months of rental assistance that will stop the eviction proceedings. And with that, it's not just arrears payment, but also future rent as well. So with the goal of definitely sustaining housing throughout this COVID crisis. As the administering agency, we are really charged with 3 tasks, which is, of course, are to outreach to the community, process payments, of course, efficiently, and also report back to the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, which is the funding source entity. And just to give you an idea, to date, the program was announced in October, but it did take a few weeks before the program really gained its legs. And so I would say we've had more momentum in the past 2-3 weeks of November. To date, we have received 132 tenant applications, so tenants who do want to participate, who currently have a suit of eviction with their landlord and who are looking for that 6 months of rental assistance. We have 42 landlords who have also enrolled in completed applications as well. And you'll see here that some landlords are enrolling for multiple tenants. We have one landlord in particular who has submitted certification paperwork for 13 of their tenants who currently have an eviction filed. And you'll also see a breakdown of the courts that for the tenant applications that we have received, the particular court that eviction is filed in as well. And to the far right, is just some basic information where you can learn more about the Eviction Diversion Pilot Program, as well as some of our upcoming efforts as well, and how individuals can apply. And so with that, I would like to say that I think the next piece, and I think what many of the members of the task force can really help us with, is just that messaging and that consistent communication as we continue to implement and actually follow through with a successful program. Some of the kind of myths that are out there about the Texas Eviction Diversion Program, if I can just debunk a few of them. If a tenant does have the CDC declaration, or if a landlord has a tenant with the CDC declaration, can they still apply? And the answer is yes, they are able to still apply for the program. There's also a belief that it is required to appear in court prior to submitting an application for assistance. And that is actually, that's not the case. The time between filing an eviction and someone actually having their court appearance, they are able to submit an application or a landlord enrollment to participate in the program as well. And also with that, the state does have a set of deadlines or timelines that administrating agencies are required to process payments. And with that, we have 14 days from the time that we have both the completed application from the tenant and also a complete and accurate application, keyword accurate, application from a landlord as well. We have 14 days to remit payment as well. And I would also like to just close with, although we know that this is a pilot program, I do want to say that we are also looking very closely at applying our CARES funding that we have received as a community action agency to continue the program as well as the COVID crisis does continue. And so we are looking at that, of course, on a case-by-case basis. Funding is available currently, and yes, it is still available to this date. It's just a matter of processing applications, accurate applications, and really helping both the tenant and landlord to understand the terms of the program itself. And so we do have an event tomorrow. That's Saturday. It'll start at 9 and end at 12, and we are offering a drive-through application process as well. So if you all have any questions for me, I'm happy to take them. But thank you for the time to share, to talk about the Texas Eviction Diversion Program as well.
It does look like we have a couple of questions, Stephen, if we want to do them now. Okay, in the chat, we have a question from Chriselle about how many tenants are able to be served with the current amount of funds, and if there was a place to see the list of frequently asked questions.
There are frequently asked questions, I believe, posted to TDHCA's website. We do not have a list of FAQs, but I can easily develop some and make sure that gets posted to our website, which is applytedp.info. And so there's no limit for how many tenants one landlord can, one landlord can submit certification or applications for. With $600,000 and the 6 months of rent, we're looking at about 100 households that can be assisted. But again, we are looking at applying our additional CARES funds to continue the program as well, past the pilot.
And then there was just a question about sharing some of the challenges around landlords turning down the rental assistance through the program that was mentioned in the video that was shared as the link.
I'll actually turn this question over to Donna. Just from what we did see when we attended some of the eviction proceedings is that many landlords are asking for writ of possession only, but I will let, Donna's definitely an expert there, and I'll let her speak to that.
Yeah, so I kind of have some of that in my presentation as well. Can we maybe circle back to that?
Yes.
I want to make sure that Amanda has a chance to respond to all of the questions.
And then we have one more question in the chat and then one hand raised for Amanda. From Renee, he states that landlords participating in the county rental assistance program have stated they have a conflict about accessing the tenant eviction diversion program. They believe they have to proceed with an eviction to participate, and he wanted clarification on that.
Yes, an eviction filed is a requirement to participate in the eviction diversion program. So the landlord and tenant must be in a suit of eviction.
Okay. And then I am unmuting you to ask your question, so you can go ahead.
Hi, I have a couple of questions. So one is, what is being done to apply maybe an equity-based lens to the disbursement of funds? Is there like an equity piece to application review when we're thinking about race and ethnicity, when we're thinking about household composition, things like that? And then could you speak a little bit more around the eligibility requirements for or any obligations for landlords associated with the program?
Yes, I can speak to both of those. So we are processing applications on a first come, but really it's a first complete. And we have a team that's divided between courts, but we're also making sure that if there's one court that has a higher number of applications that are being referred, that we're able to divide that up equitably as well. With the program, it was designed by TDHCA, and no, there are no, I guess, criteria in terms of household size, a larger household size versus a smaller household size or anything like that. It is an income-based program. but there are also some automatic qualifiers as well. And that specific detail is also available on the website, the applytedp.info, or on TDHCA's website as well. So in terms of the income restrictions, as well as the auto qualifiers for tenants. And then in terms of eligibility, housing units that receive public housing benefit or project-based assistance, they are not eligible to apply for this particular program, as well as Section 8 housing as well is not eligible to apply for the program. A landlord is required to waive specific fees upon receipt of the payment, and those fees are late fees as well as the court fee as well. And also, if a tenant has greater than 5 months in arrears, and that is something that we're seeing kind of the trend currently, it is required that they are made whole, I guess, way to say that, made whole with the additional arrearages or additional months. And so that's where we're able to look at our other funding that we also have, and we're helping clients to zero that balance and then move forward with applying the 6 months of TEDP funding.
I think that's all the questions we have for Amanda at this point.
Thank you.
Donna, the floor is yours.
Okay, can I share screen, Claire?
Yes, at the bottom, you should see kind of a green button at the bottom panel, and you should be able to click that to share your screen.
Okay.
There you go.
And hopefully you all can see, as proficient as I might be with the share screen. So let me just start out by saying that this pilot program is something that the state of Texas announced, I'm going to say sometime in late September, early October. The pilot program for the eviction diversion program was set to launch October 12th. The way that the state rolled this out, to the best of our knowledge, is that there were several counties, and Harris is one of them. And the state kind of left this to every one of the sub-agencies' devices to pull together their own program. Our office in Houston, Lone Star Legal Aid's Houston office, was asked to help not only Harris County, but we were also asked to help in Montgomery County. So we kind of got to see how different agencies like Gulf Coast kind of had to invent something. And I really applaud Gulf Coast for pulling together a monumental project with, I think, some guidance from the state, but really kind of on their own, tenant applications, landlord applications, and then the ability to try to disseminate these funds. I think initially Harris County had been given $500,000. One of the pilot counties said that they were not interested in the program, and that bumped Harris County up to $600,000. Lone Star Legal Aid is the legal service provider that was kind of appointed as the legal service provider in Harris County to oversee the legal service aspect of this program. We are working with other legal service providers in Harris County on this initiative. I want to talk briefly, just really briefly, about other protections that are available, because I think we lose sight when we talk about tenant protections. We talk about the Texas Eviction Diversion Program, and we forget that there may be other protections that are available. There are still some lingering protections under the CARES Act. We are seeing there are moments here and there that landlords and sometimes courts and certainly tenants lose sight of that. They're more few and far between. The CDC order still does exist. It is still in place. We are seeing the CDC order. The declarative statement is often filed by tenants where it is applicable to tenants, and the tenant is represented by an attorney. Otherwise, we're seeing it glossed over frequently by tenants who have no idea what it is, and courts that might address it, but where tenants don't have representation, they may not understand the full effect of the benefit of the declarative statement that the CDC provides. Also, realistically, we are coming up on the end of the year. So the protections that the CDC declarative statement gives a tenant with an abatement through the end of the calendar year, we're now looking at about 40 days out. And then finally, the diversion program. What the diversion program effectively says is that if a landlord and a tenant on the day of the hearing or at any point before the hearing let the court know that they want to participate in this program, the court must abate the case for 60 days. We were in court just yesterday, I want to say it was yesterday, maybe the day before, where the landlord and the tenant said that they were interested in the program. And then the landlord said, but wait, I want a ruling on the CDC declarative statement. And the court entertained that motion first and then abated the case. Luckily for our client, we won on the CDC, but this order wasn't necessarily followed in that case where the litigation file must be abated. It's got to be abated for 60 days and the entire court record needs to be sealed. It needs to go confidential for that time period. If the parties work everything out, the case will remain confidential and sealed, a huge benefit to the tenant forever and ever. So for the tenant who has like a one-off pandemic eviction, they actually will not have an eviction record. For tenants who have repeat eviction filings, then one eviction filing will fall off of their record. And I think that that's really an important benefit to tenants, and tenants are not aware of that benefit if they're not told. I want to talk briefly about some of the concerns we are hearing from landlords. So the application process is arduous for people who are, for landlords who are simply seeking possession and or money. We have heard landlords raise concerns about actual funding, which is to say, that's fine, we are considering this program, we're considering helping our tenants even complete their part of the program, but when will we get funded? And so we do have clarity, and we have been disseminating information that within 14 days, they should get a lump sum of funding for the entire amount for which the application's been made. And if the parties are eligible, that is a huge benefit to the landlord. If things fall apart and the application is not completed in time, what the Texas Supreme Court emergency order states, and this is the 28th emergency order for anybody who really wants to know the details, this is a second emergency order that's come out on the eviction diversion program. The first one laid it out as a pilot. The second one talks about launching this statewide after the first of the new year. But what happens if the program falls apart for this landlord-tenant duo is that the plaintiff, the landlord, can ask to reinstate the case. And for some landlords, that's just too big, that's too tall an order to ask them to go and reinstate a case. They don't want to have to deal with reinstatement of cases. That sounds like a lot of work to do. And so they rather not entertain the program to begin with. The work that we've been doing at Lone Star Legal Aid is kind of an attempt to bridge some of the gap in terms of the knowledge that's missing for the litigants. We started a very invasive outreach program, literally going into courthouses where judges have allowed us to come into the courthouse. Shocking or not, some judges will not allow us into their courthouse to set up a table, despite the fact that they will have litigants come into the courthouse. This past week and a half or so, we've been to a handful of dockets where we've seen countless non-payment of rent cases go before the courts. And one of the dockets in front of Judge Patronella, who's the downtown seat, Precinct 1, Place 2, was covered heavily by the media. There were a number of news pieces in the television. The one piece I think that Stephen was trying to air earlier, I've got the link for you here. Judge Patronella talks about why landlords don't want to buy in. And our staff attorney who was there talks about the fact that there's kind of an overwhelming feeling and hopelessness and defeat on the part of the tenants. I did capture a picture. I thought this would be helpful for you all to see some of the outreach that we're conducting. It is a monumental effort in the middle of a pandemic to set up attorneys and paralegals to meet the public where the public is getting evicted. And I'm super proud of my team. These are 2 of my staff attorneys and 2 paralegals who are out there doing outreach. I need to note that the outreach is not intended to only inform tenants. We are also providing information to landlords. Our team comes fully prepared with packets, application packets for tenants and landlords to complete. We've been in touch with Gulf Coast from the beginning of this. We will provide the packets. We'll do everything we can to get completed applications so that these landlord-tenant duos can get into the program. Some of the tenant concerns, well, the biggest one we've heard is the landlord doesn't want to participate. And we can't do a whole lot about that except to urge them to participate. You know, the next threat that's coming down the pike to the landlord is you may get possession, you're never going to get a dime. I think our eviction unit down the road in a year or 18 months from now is going to turn into a bankruptcy clinic. So there's that. There is that lack of participation. Last night when Amanda and I spoke in preparation of this, Amanda used the terminology application fatigue. And I think she's right. I think we are seeing lots of tenants, you know, kind of face this fatigue at all these programs, some of which they get relief, some of which they don't get relief. They never know what will actually happen with all this information they're providing. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of self-eviction, lack of education, understanding their rights, and of course, the hopelessness that we've talked about, I think, quite a bit in this task force. Finally, I want to tell you a little bit about our efforts. I would be remiss if I didn't thank Sophie. I didn't put that in the chat box earlier to thank Sophie and Jeff for his data and Sophie for all of the work that they've been doing, kind of to support what we're doing. So the Eviction Defense Coalition is not just me and Lone Star Legal Aid. My team has really been working hard, but we are working with these organizations that I've listed here, Houston Volunteer Lawyers and the 3 law schools. We started this right to counsel. This was, I think, the brainchild of Judge Brown. I applaud him. I think we're going to really miss him on the bench come January. And I do hope that he'll remain involved, certainly with the other judges that we're hoping will continue to pull the chariot. We don't have buy-in from the court. It's astounding to see that there are judges who could very well launch a right to counsel in their courts and don't necessarily want to offer that to their constituents. So we have some right to counsel in some courts, some judges very willing to participate, and some not so much. So getting buy-in from the courts and from the public, I think, is still a challenge. I would want you all to know that this is its first of its kind right to counsel anywhere in the state of Texas. You don't see many right to counsel throughout the country, but certainly not in Texas, where tenant rights are few and far between. When we say counsel, we're not talking about counsel that's being offered in Dallas or San Antonio. We are talking about full-blown extended representation for every eligible tenant. And that is a big deal. We're taking cases where we have concerns if there are defenses, but we know what it means to have an attorney. I want to point out that when Jeff, I ask every time Jeff talks, I ask him to provide the statistic. Back in September, when he presented his statistics, we were under 2%. We were 1.62%, I think, of tenants were represented by attorneys. Today, I believe Jeff said that for the month of November, we're at 4.25. I see that as a huge gain for the Eviction Defense Coalition, where we are really trying hard to up the number of tenants who are represented by attorneys and to even out that playing field. We are referring cases among coalition members for undocumented tenants. That is a huge demand that we've gotten from the county. We want to meet that demand. And then finally, we had testified, I had personally testified on behalf of Lone Star Legal Aid, that what it would cost to offer a right to counsel countywide is approximately $4 million. There are studies like the Stout study in Baltimore on return on investments. We've talked about it in this task force. I think it's important for this group to know that representing tenants where tenants are about to get evicted in court is the most impactful project that this task force could recommend to the county. That's my take. And then finally, we are continuing to do coordinated outreach programs, both through the media, obviously through the constables. If you've kept up with the news, there's been a huge outreach program through Precinct 1 constables, through the schools, through food banks, everywhere we are asked to do a public outreach, we are going to meet tenants where we can find them. So on that note, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll stop sharing screen. And I'm really grateful to the Housing Stability Task Force members that are still here. Thank you all for supporting our work.
Thank you, Donna and Amanda. But I'll tell you what, just in the interest of time, I think what we're going to do is ask people to forward along any questions in the chat. And then if we recoup a little bit of time, we'll come back to this during the Q&A. But I'd like to turn it over both to Renee, and then Cynthia was not able to join us, but Bart is here from Catholic Charities. So I'll let Renee and then Bart go, and then we can turn to questions if we have a few minutes left.
All right, so I'm up right there, Stephen. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking some time this morning to have this important discussions. I'll be brief in my statements or in my sharing of information. Claire, are you going to share the screen since I sent you the PowerPoint, or do you want me to send you the PDF?
Yes.
Or do you want me to share? Okay.
Yes, I can pull it up.
Thank you so much. So we've made some good progress on the rental assistance program that we administer both for the city and the county. In this, which was now round 2, if you remember, round 1 was with the city and it was $15 million. Round 2 combined $40 million from the county and $20 million from the city. So here are the numbers for your review, and Claire has the report, so she's able to share it with anybody that's interested in looking at more of the details. But we do have close to 14,500 landlord locations participating in the program, of which we have 7,600 owners of properties. On the tenant side, we received over 47,900 applications. Because if you'll recall, it was a first come, first serve at the beginning. I'm sorry, it was a selection. We're going to do a lottery on round 2. We did get a lot of duplicate applications, people trying to improve their chances to get rental assistance. So from that 47,900 applications, it actually 32,800 applications were selected for processing. Some were removed because they were, again, duplicate applications, or because they were outside the geographic area, or they didn't qualify for other reasons. As of today, we have paid, of those 32,867 applications, we have paid 20,677 for round 2. Just as a reminder, round 2 is the months of April through August rental assistance payments. So that's how much we've processed. So looking at those applications in dollar amounts, all 47, close to 48,000 applications, was $66 million in requests. When we adjusted for the duplicate applications, as well as adjust for the maximum benefit, whether it was $1,900 for the county or whether it was $2,100 for the city, the maximum that those applications would have been paid was $46.5 million. And to date, we have paid $23.8 million. So if you'll scroll down a little bit there, Claire, if you don't mind, right here, if you'll zoom in there a little bit, that'll show that in the bottom right-hand box, you will see that breaks down what's been spent in terms of the city funds and what's been spent in the county funds. We're almost done with the city funds. $14.4 million has been paid. And $9 million has been paid for the county. So that's round 2. We are no longer accepting applications for round 2. Again, that's April through August. But a lot of credit goes to Harris County and Commissioner's Court and the county judge, because they have made changes to the program to allow for this to continue to go forward. So a few weeks ago, we launched round 3 of the funding, which now includes the rental months of September, October, and November. And some good things that Harris County did was they essentially reset the maximum award for round 3. So in round 3, again, for September, October, November, now there's a new $1,900 of maximum benefit to tenants who are past due on their rent for September, October, November. So if they received assistance in round 2, they're eligible again to receive assistance in round 3, and the maximum benefit resets for the new months. And that, of course, makes sense because the pandemic is going longer than any of us would have imagined or any of us would have wanted to. But we are seeing spikes, and we are seeing the impact of the pandemic on people's ability to work and their earnings and their ability to thus pay for their housing. So that's a really cool thing. Again, kudos go out to all the commissioners and the county judge for working with us to get those changes done. And they didn't stop there. Commissioners Court and the county judge went further. They approved some additional changes that make it easier for tenants to apply for the program. One thing they did that aligned with what the city was doing, which again, we as a task force in the early days worked a lot with the city and the county to try align the two programs, and that is still happening, just so you all know, thanks to your efforts. So one thing that the county did was they allowed households who may already be eligible or receiving benefits to some other social or public benefit program to be automatically eligible. So if you have a tenant who is currently receiving CHIP or TANF or the school voucher program, the school food program, those kind of things, then they're automatically eligible for the rental assistance program as well. They've also streamlined some processes for us and policies for how people who have had minimal impact or have difficulty in demonstrating the impact that they've had, economic impact that they've had due to COVID, that makes it a little bit easier for them. So there's a lot of certification, self-certifications, forms and ability that renters can now submit to us when they're having difficulty to submit certain documents. As of now, we have started round 3 payments already. I mentioned that we have 9.1 million of county funds paid in round 2. We've already paid $900,000 in round 3 as of this week. So now in total, we're over $10 million in payments out of the Harris County funds. As I mentioned, we're no longer accepting applications for April through August, but we're still processing some of those applications that are in our queue. So currently we're working with both round 2 and the new round 3 applications. I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions if we have time. If not, you all know how to reach me by phone or by email at rsolis@bakerripley.org. So thanks again to the task force for all of your support through this.
Great. Thank you for that, Renee. Awesome work y'all are doing. And Bart, I know you've got to go in a few minutes, but if you could update us on the exciting work that Catholic Charities has been doing with direct assistance.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me back. It's good to see the team again. I'm sharing my screen here. You'll see on our website, catholiccharities.help.org. Ironically, this is just a couple of days old, but I'll give you an update of what we're doing on the direct assistance program. So as of Thursday, you can see that we've distributed $19 million of the $40 million that's there. And we're doing about $1 million a day. And that's about 800 applications or 800 households helped every day. Yesterday, we did hit a new high and did just over 1,000 households yesterday. And that was $1.2 million. So our assistance out as of today is a little over $21 million. We had a public application period November 2nd through the 6th. We got about 75,000 applications total to continue to serve. So we'll have many people in need that we won't be able to serve because we'll run out of money first. But you can see that we are moving through it at the pace of over $1 million a day distributed. We'll definitely be able to finish before our deadline of December 30th. This graphic is updated multiple times a week on our website, catholiccharities.help.org/data, and we can put that in the chat. But it's out there for you guys to use or see the progress on it. We're really proud to be able to get help into the folks' hands. We've had some really great stories come out of this that we'll probably be seeing in the news. Things like folks maybe living in a storage unit who are being able to get some help and some relief from the issues that they're facing. So a good response from the community, and we continue to push out additional money to help the community.
Great. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes of questions and conversation. And I think some questions came in over the chat. Maybe Claire, start with the questions that came in for Bart, because I know there were some related to Catholic Charities, and then you can just handle whatever others come in, and then we can open it up.
Sure. And we received one question from Chriselle, which I'm assuming is for Catholic Charities, they're hearing that from several tenants that they've applied but were denied and didn't know why. And so she was wondering, are people being told why they were denied? And let me just unmute you, Bart, so you can respond.
Sure. I think as tenants, that may be more Renee for the landlord program. For us, we do send an email out and letting them know that their application was not approved, and they've had communication why they what they needed to submit, and if they weren't able to submit documents to verify that, we let them know that too.
So just like a clarification, so like the way in which they are notified that they are approved or denied is via email?
If they've communicated with us via email, then we answer via email. If they communicate with us via text, we try to match their communication with us.
Okay. Thanks.
Same with us. We communicate by email and by text, depending on what the client submitted in their application as their form of communication. Initially, we didn't do any. We took the approach of we're not doing any denial letters initially, unless the system prompted an automatic denial. So, for example, if a tenant in their application stated that they already received benefits from Harris County, well, the Harris County fund disqualifies them because you can't receive duplication of benefits. So if they indicated things like that, if they indicated that their income was above the income threshold, then the system would automatically generate a denial letter. And yes, it would say why they were not eligible for the funding. As we work applications, if it passed through the system checks, as we work applications, there are very few that we're sending right now in denials, because our approach is we're going to work with them to get whatever documentation is required to get them to the finish line and get them the rental assistance. So that means, however, there's a lot of applications that are what we call work in progress that we're still trying to get to the finish line. And sometimes people feel like, they're not sure what the status is of their application, but we are still working with them. So if they've not received a denial letter or denial notification, it's because we still have it in our queue. We still want to get them to the finish line.
Great. We also have some questions that I can go back to for Amanda and Donna. The first was for Amanda, what's the process to take the learnings from the pilot to inform changes to the program design prior to scaling in January, and what changes will be made? So I can unmute you so you can respond to that.
Any of those changes will come directly from the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. We have not been informed of any changes. I know that they're looking closely at our reporting. There's been several forms and document changes in the last 2 months that we've been required to implement, but any specific programmatic structural changes, how someone accesses the program, that will all come from the State Department, and we haven't heard anything yet on any expected changes after the pilot.
Great. And then the next question, maybe for both you and for Donna, so is kind of a question from Curtis about insights as to why different types of landlords are choosing not to participate. And as a follow-up to that, if it was possible to do focus groups with those kind of more disinterested landlords and judges?
I might actually ask you to unmute Howard, because he was relatively outspoken in the Fox News piece. The news piece for which you have that link. One of the things we hear a lot of is, I can't pay my mortgage, I'm going into foreclosure. I think we all know that foreclosures have been canceled by and large for several months going now. So I don't know what's going on with foreclosures. I'm not a foreclosure lawyer. And I do respect that. I mean, I understand that that is a significant concern, but this program will put 6 months in a lump sum in landlords' pockets. So I think that there's some resistance to kind of, I think there's a resistance to programs in general, and this application fatigue and this unknown, this lack of certainty or confidence that the program will in fact work, that the tenant will not drag their feet, that the landlord won't drag their feet, that the agency won't drag its feet, that the landlord won't have to go and reopen the case. There are just so many unknowns. I think that that's kind of the feedback that we're getting from landlords when we are in the trenches in the courthouse trying to persuade landlords, please consider this 6 months worth of rent. Certainly landlords who have multiple tenants and can multiply the dollar amount that they could potentially get. On the flip side, I have to say, we've also seen some landlords with multiple tenants do their own outreach and say, tenants, we will help you with this program so that we can get everybody squared away all at once. And I applaud those landlords.
Yes, that's exactly, I totally agree. And I think I forgot who said the landlord issues, Amanda or Donna said it, is exactly right. So what we love about the program is 6 months is great. Backward and forward is great. We would love any program to have that. What we don't like about the program, which we've been telling everybody, and I think everybody on this call probably agrees, it comes really late in the process. It's nice to see that you can engage in the program as soon as you file the eviction, because I think a lot of landlords are under the misconception it's got to be referred by the judge once you get to the judge. And so it's nice to hear that you can back it up at least a month by being able to access the program. But I guess it's not really when you file the eviction, but when maybe the tenant is served with the eviction, that would be the push point on when you can access the program. So that's what's great about it. The 6 months, the backwards and forwards. What landlords, I think, and Donna is exactly on point. What the landlord, I mean, it's hard to trust the process if you're a tenant or a landlord since March, because everyone's kind of been making this stuff as we go, up as we go. And I think that's part of the problem, is trusting the process. When will we actually get paid? And nobody really knows, because it takes a completed application on both sides to get paid. So that's that's an issue. The reinstatement process, we don't know if the courts are going to be shut down at some point while the 60 days is going on. And if you don't get to the court in 60 days, your case is dismissed with prejudice, meaning you cannot ever go back and try to get that money if you don't get the money from the program. So I think there's issues with that. We actually have talked to TDHCA, the state. We've made comments to the OCA, the Office of Court Administration, that does the Texas Eviction Diversion Program rules about these comments. And so hopefully some of these things will be massaged in the rollout to all counties, which we're still not sure when that's going to happen, but it should happen at some time. Then I'm also told that about 150 million or so, the Texas Eviction Diversion Program is only 10% of the 170 that was allotted to the state. So we have about 150-ish that is going to be in some sort of rental assistance program that's not court related. And if that has the 6 months forward and backwards, that's going to be great. I actually have, as a landlord's attorney, I've been looking for cases that we could really take advantage of the program. And it's got to be the right kind of situation, because unfortunately, we do have tenants that are much more than 5 months delinquent now. They haven't paid since March. We have tenants that have ignored landlords. We have tenants that have other issues than just the non-payment problem. And those are, the landlords are not going to be interested in the program because it's either too much delinquency or it's not the right fit for the program because we just don't want this tenant anymore because of other issues. So there's other things going on. And it'd be interesting if we could do a deeper dive in some of the statistics. Why aren't landlords doing it? You know, what kind of numbers are there? Why landlords aren't doing it? We've actually put in our petitions, we're interested. It's got to be the right kind of deal. Donna, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm happy that you're chiming in, Howard, because I think that your perspective is very valuable on why landlords are coming to court. And you know, we've been now in the last 10 days, we've been to a handful of a really significant number of dockets in person where we don't even have clients. We're just there. Where judges are allowing us to address the gallery of litigants before docket call to announce the program and talk about the program. One judge called me this week and asked if we would prepare an informational video to talk about the program so that we could be persuasive, because maybe we as lawyers are more persuasive than the judge might be in telling, you know, litigants, there's this program and it's really great and go sign up. You know, I do have concerns that this program came too little too late. I know we're focused on Harris County and there should be additional funds that trickle down to Harris County. The original emergency order that announced this program was meant to roll out the entire state in the month of November. And we now know that's not going to happen because there's been this 28th emergency order that's postponed the statewide rollout to January. What that means for Harris County is that we will not see additional funding until after the new year. And that's disconcerting. And I think it's too little too late to the extent that, you know, some landlords are not willing to wait any longer and tenants really, really don't want to enter these applications. We haven't even scratched the surface on undocumented tenants who by a long shot don't want to complete this paperwork. They're so afraid of the consequences of completing this paperwork. So this program, although they're not automatically disqualified because they're undocumented, they're not coming anywhere near this paperwork. We've seen that in our client base. So you know, and maybe the biggest problem with this program that we don't want to talk about, but we really need to face the music, is that this program prompts the most benevolent of landlords who did not want to file for eviction to suddenly file for eviction so that they can get a case number and go get that money. This program is not available to landlords who do not have a case number. As soon as they have that case number, they can go sign up for this program. And that's a tragedy, but that's where we stand.
Great. We have one final question before we move on to our next presentation, and that is to Donna and potentially Howard of when it comes to these kind of conversations, they've primarily been framed as legal and economic issues, and what is the scope for framing them, framing the issues like a right to representation or eviction prevention as moral issues, and what communications channels might we leverage to extend that message?
You know, I heard that might be a question for Howard to answer. I'm really eager to hear if Howard has any response on that. I do think we have a moral obligation to provide counsel in housing cases. I think in this country, we've had a moral obligation in some criminal matters. I think it should go without saying that before a person loses their housing in an eviction case, we should be offering a right to counsel. I want to share very briefly one of my first cases, and it was under the CARES Act, where a landlord was in violation of the CARES Act. I represented one tenant who had a case, one landlord, one tenant. That landlord had 4 other cases on the docket that day. I responded in that lawsuit and told the landlord we had other issues. My client had another affirmative case. I told the landlord, you have until close of business to dismiss your case. not only because you violated this other stuff, but because you're in violation of the CARES Act. And the landlord said no. And finally, before the close of business, I got a copy of a letter. It's in the court record. It's a public record. That landlord, because I represented the one tenant, that landlord went and dismissed all of the cases, not just against my client, but against the other 4 tenants. That is the benefit of having an attorney representing a tenant in court. Somebody needs to be there to speak the law. And the protections that we have right now are very few and far between, and Corona brought them to town. They're not going to last forever. This is the reason why we need to have a right to counsel, is so that we can even out the playing field for tenants in eviction courts. I could go on, but I think we're short on time.
All right, we'll let Howard have the last word on that one before we turn it over to Peter. How about that?
This is killing Stephen. Okay, we're gonna go on till, we could go on till 4 today, 4 in the afternoon.
Yeah, no, really, do keep it brief, because Peter's got a national perspective that we want to get to.
Right, just a couple of thoughts. Number one is the statement was made that the outcomes would be different if the tenants had counsel. Do you mean to say the tenants paid rent when the landlord is saying they didn't get the rent? Because those outcomes we would be really interested in. If it's a case where the landlords didn't dot all the I's and cross all the T's, well, Donna is correct. The landlord should lose if they didn't give a proper notice to vacate. The reality is they're going to lose that case only to give a proper notice to vacate and refile. You're really not changing the outcome, the ultimate outcome of the possession issue. So I'd be interested in hearing the stats about that. If a landlord is going forward on an eviction for non-payment of rent when they really got paid, that's wrong. I mean, the landlord ought to take the money and not go forward on the eviction. The other issue is, I think there is an issue with respect to a lot of landlords are not represented as well. The typical, which I'm not sure everyone understands, that the typical landlords during non-COVID times, in non-payment of rent, the apartment manager just goes to court themselves without a lawyer, or they get, there's a company called Nationwide that they might get to just do the cases. And it really is up to the rules allow the judge to do a lot of the, let's say, lawyer work. They can ask questions themselves, develop the facts of the case themselves. And I think our judges do that. And so those are just the 2 comments. Like I said, Stephen, we could go on all day, but I won't.
Okay, thank you, Howard. I'm now delighted to turn the agenda over to Peter, and just delighted that you've been able to join us. And I should say that we, Peter and the team at the Eviction Lab, Jeff has been working closely with them for many months, and Peter had offered to join us earlier, but for some reason his day job as a professor got in the way of previous scheduling. So we're delighted to be able to have him join us today. So Peter, it's yours. And I think if you want to either have Claire control the PowerPoint, or you can do it, whatever is your pleasure.
Thanks. I'll go ahead and just share my screen. And yeah, thank you for having me, and sorry for the delay in getting here. It's the day job as a professor and the second day job as a child care provider that really make it hard to make the calendar work. So I want to talk to you today about some of the trends that we're seeing in the eviction tracking system. So I'm gonna just go ahead and share the screen. Okay, and then, all right, you can all see that okay? Okay, great. So I'm gonna just put that in there. All right, so so I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing out of the eviction tracking system, try to put Harris County in sort of a national perspective, and then talk a little bit about some preliminary analyses that we've done recently of eviction filings during and after state and local moratoria. A lot of the work that I'm going to be talking about today here was facilitated directly by Jeff Reichman and by David McClendon at January Advisors. It's great to be able to present this this work in a group that Jeff's been part of. So I'd like to start by just introducing the eviction tracking system. For those of you who are not familiar with it, the ETS is a tool for monitoring eviction filings in something close to real time. It exists primarily as a website, which is hosted by the Eviction Lab at Princeton University. It's updated every Tuesday afternoon with data current as of the previous Saturday. We built the eviction tracker to solve a data accessibility problem. So Matt Desmond and the Eviction Lab team built this great resource for understanding the risk of eviction nationwide. But that resource is necessarily limited. Currently, the Eviction Lab's national database covers the years 2000 up to 2016. I'm hoping that they add 2017, 2018 pretty soon, but it's always going to be a few years out of date. And that's just the nature of those data, and that's fine. But Matt and I got to talking in March and thought it would be helpful to have a way of seeing what the eviction landscape looks like during the current moment of crisis. Because the federal government doesn't collect those data, and almost no state or counties publicly report eviction data without at least a year's delay, we decided to build a tool that would allow us to see what's happening right now. And to do that, we started in Harris County. I knew Jeff and his team from another project, and I was sure of their capacity to extract eviction data from the Harris County courts. So starting with the list of, I think, 270 counties in which I knew that the Eviction Lab had good historical data, I challenged Jeff and his team to find other courts in which we could get equivalent information. And that's what he did. They found us courts around the country where we could get regular eviction filing data with sufficient plaintiff and defendant information so that we could clean and geocode the data. And because we have historical data, we can also compare to what we saw in previous years, which allows us to kind of understand how unusual 2020 has been relative to normal. So at this point, we've got 26 cities that are listed on the Eviction Tracker website. This is a partial list of those sites on the homepage. Jeff and David are responsible for, I think, the first 11 or 12 of these sites. And since we launched in June, we've been able to serve as something of a clearinghouse for data collected by other groups as well. So like our data for Pittsburgh was collected by a researcher at Carnegie Mellon. Data in Connecticut and Philadelphia were collected by legal aid and housing advocacy groups. Down in Gainesville, Florida, it's the local chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America who are collecting these data. And I think it's kind of an exciting model, and I'm proud of our ability to bring these data together. We present them as pertaining to a set of cities at this point, but we're actually collecting data for the entirety of 9 states, and we're working on developing a full state display to add to the public website. Unfortunately, Texas is not one of those states. Once you factor in the full state data collection, the eviction tracker now covers about 9.4 million renter households, which amounts to 1 in every 5 renter households in the United States. So across just the cities that are covered by the eviction tracker, we've seen about 110,000 total eviction filings since the start of the pandemic in mid-March. Over 3,000 of those were filed just in the last week. At this point, we can think of sites as falling into sort of 3 categories, which are having low, mid-range, or high filings relative to historical average. So in the first group of cities, the first group are cities where the filings are at or below about 20% of historical average. That includes 4 cities in which local or state eviction moratoria are still in place or only recently lifted. So that's Austin, Boston, Bridgeport, and Hartford. St. Louis does not have a local moratorium, but it's been unexpectedly trending downwards over the last few months. Our read on it there is that they have a pretty effective eviction diversion program in place there, and one that doesn't require the filing to happen before the process can move forward. The next group of cities are those in which filings fall between about 20% and 80% of historical average. This is the most common scenario, obviously. It's the vast majority of them here. It's worth noting that Milwaukee is in this category. Milwaukee had been running above historical average earlier in the summer and has gone down since then. And Houston is also in this group. And then there's this handful of sites that are near or above historical average. Most of those are in Florida, but we've also got Richmond, Virginia in that category. So I think it can be helpful to take a look at what membership in each of these categories actually looks like in practice. And toward that end, I'm going to show you a couple of examples. So this is what Boston looks like. This is our example of a low filing site. Most weeks in Boston since April, there have been less than 10 new filings. And we have yet up until November to see a month that's above 10% of historical average. So what happened is that Massachusetts had a state level eviction moratorium that ran up until October 17th, which is right here. Since that time, they've got a 14-day notice period that's built into their state regulations. And so filings have been pretty low until last week, where we saw this jump up to 55 filings in Boston. And we're worried that in the coming weeks, that number is going to start to increase pretty quickly. That pattern of filings that trend upwards after a moratorium ended was exactly what we saw in Philadelphia. Serves as an example of a mid-range city in terms of total filings. Pennsylvania's moratorium ended on August 31st, which is where, again, we see the blue lines sort of end here. And then weekly filings jumped immediately thereafter, even with the CDC moratorium, which is marked in pink here, in place. Still, I mean, it's going up, but we're only at about 40, I guess about 45% of historical average now in November. Houston, again, falls in this category. These are the same numbers that Jeff was presenting earlier on the call. I just want to show you what this looks like on our interface. We've seen this sort of steady level of weekly filings, although last week we saw the largest number of filings in Harris County since the beginning of the pandemic. I should note that the numbers that we're displaying here for Houston incorporate both Harris and Galveston. And then we get to the high filing sites. And here I'm going to use Jacksonville as an example. Again, this is a case where filings spiked after a state level moratorium lifted, and they've been rising pretty consistently since then. Filings were a little over 80% of historical average for September and October, and they're about 15% above average for the first couple weeks of November. And now, obviously, there's a bit of noise that comes with a short observation window like 2 weeks, but it's still not an encouraging sign to see numbers above 100% and generally trending upwards. So I want to take a step back and, rather than focus on any individual site, take a look at what we see when we look across all of our sites combined. So what you're looking at here are weekly eviction filings across all of the ETS sites relative to historical average for all of 2020. So you can see over here on the left that weekly filings were running right around 100% of normal back in January and February, pretty much right up to the point where the pandemic starts, which we've got marked here by this dashed red vertical line. So at that point, courts around the nation shut down, eviction moratoria are put into place, filings fall to historic lows down here in April. Over the summer, those numbers start to creep up, and they've kept moving upwards to the point where we're now above 50% of average across all sites. And that's despite the CDC eviction moratorium. Your eye may well be drawn to these two orange bars, and that's the 2 weeks that fell between when the CARES Act protections were in place and when the CDC moratorium went into effect. So I'm not going to claim that the CDC moratorium isn't working. I think the hypothetical alternative is a lot more weeks that look like the week of August 30th. So clearly, cases continue to be filed, though, and the rate at which they're being filed seems to be increasing in most sites. I also want to just briefly discuss some work that my colleague Renee Lewis and I have been doing, looking at how effective state and local moratoria were in sites in the eviction tracker. So we've got a piece that we posted to the Eviction Lab website earlier this week that goes into this in depth, and I'll sort of give you the Cliff Notes version here. So basically, state and local moratoria varied pretty considerably in what protections they offered to renters. We can think of the eviction process involving kind of 5 steps, where you start with notice to tenants, and then the landlord filing with the court holding a hearing, the issuance of a writ if the judgment is in favor of the plaintiff, and then finally the sheriff's enforcement of that writ and removal of the tenant. Some local and state moratoria suspended this process right from the notice stage, while others allowed notice and filings but suspended hearings. Over in Arizona, they allowed this process to run all the way through the issuance of writs but we're then not actually enforcing those orders. So Renee and I wanted to look at what eviction filings look like relative to historical average when these moratoria were in place, and then what happened after the protections were lifted. Again, if you'd like to look at this a bit more, the URL here will take you to the full post. So here we're looking at filings during the local or state moratoria period in each of the ETS sites relative to historical average, and depending on the earliest stage of the eviction process that was suspended. So here are sites where notice was suspended, here's the ones where filings were suspended, here's where hearings were suspended, and here's Phoenix where enforcement was suspended. And that's, you see Houston, of course, falling in the, they allowed notice and filings, but hearings were suspended during the period in which Texas had a statewide moratorium. The big takeaway here is that these moratoria kept eviction filings low, and that's especially true of those that suspended the first two stages of the eviction process. So in sites in which later stages like hearings or enforcement were suspended, new filings were still well below historical average, but they were generally running higher than in those sites that suspended notice or filings. And I think that's important because we know that many tenants leave at the notice or the filing stage. If we're trying to prevent displacement during a pandemic, it seems to be critical to suspend those stages of the eviction process. And what happened when the moratoria ended? Here we're showing eviction filings relative to historical average for the 6 weeks before and the 6 weeks after the local moratoria or the state level moratoria ended. Again, we're splitting here by the earliest stage of the eviction process that was suspended. So either the notice stage, the filing stage, or the hearing stage. The red line in each of those panels is the weighted average across the included sites, and the gray lines represent each of the individual sites, just to give you a sense of how much variability there was between cities. And there's sort of two takeaways here. First, cities saw an increase in eviction filings after moratoria were lifted, which is as expected. And the size of that increase really depended on what stage of the eviction process had been suspended. So in those top two panels, we see that eviction cities in which notice or filings were suspended, they saw more dramatic jumps in those new filings when the local moratoria ended. So on average, cities in which notice was suspended, new filings jumped from 4.7% of historical average 2 weeks before the end of the moratorium to 64.7% 2 weeks after. So by contrast, in the bottom panel, we see that new filings increased much less in cities that had only suspended the hearings, since they had allowed filings throughout. Second, filings typically remained well below historical average in the 6 weeks following the lifting of local eviction moratoria. So on average, 6 weeks after the moratoria lifted, new eviction filings were only 46% of historical average. So these numbers remain below average even when the moratoria get lifted. So to wrap up here, just a few main points. First, eviction filings are trending upwards. They remain below historical average in most of the sites that we're tracking, but they are absolutely on the rise. In half a dozen, or I guess about four or five sites that we're tracking, they're already above historical average, and there are a number of others that look poised to head in that direction very, very soon. The second point that I want to make is that state and local eviction moratoria worked. We saw that these measures, especially when they froze the early stages of the eviction process, really helped considerably in bringing filings down. These are unfortunately mostly a thing of the past. Only 4 of the sites that we're tracking are still covered by a state or a local eviction moratorium. And that brings us to the CDC moratorium. I think the upshot of that one is that it provides coverage to a much broader swath of renters than the CARES Act moratorium did, at least on paper. At least on paper, it provides uniform coverage. What we're seeing in practice is that interpretation has varied considerably. It's being implemented very differently in St. Louis than it appears to be implemented in Houston. And the lack of a freeze on filings means that in quite a few of these cities in which we have data, a lot of new eviction cases are still being processed by the courts. I think with that being said, the alternative, a world in which that moratorium isn't in place is likely much worse. And unfortunately, we are about to find out at the end of this year, which is just 6.5 weeks away, exactly what that's going to look like. So I'm going to leave it there and am happy to take any questions that people have.
Claire, you want to start with Jeff's comment in the chat and then open it up to folks if they want to either send it via chat or raise their hands to jump in verbally.
Sure. So the question from Jeff is, do you think Richmond, Virginia is higher than historical average because they implemented a diversion program a few years back, so they've been lower recently?
In Richmond, we're actually, I need to confirm this, but we're pulling numbers that are from before that diversion program went into place. So it should be, that shouldn't be the explanation.
For others, feel free to put any comments in the chat or raise your hand.
I guess I'm curious, Peter, as you think about the work of this task force, I think we're both, as you heard today, developing programmatic responses and also beginning to contemplate what the potential policy recommendations are as we emerge from the situation. Do you have ideas of, if you were a member of the task force here, what you would be proposing and advocating as something that we should be recommending to our local policymakers, recognizing that our state legislative ability is probably much more attenuated and limited?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I hesitate to be too presumptuous in making recommendations here. But I think one of the things that we've heard in talking with groups across the country has been repeatedly the difficulty in distributing emergency rental relief funds. And it seems that your groups or associated members of this group have been involved in efforts to establish an infrastructure for doing that. And I think making sure that that infrastructure is able to handle a large influx of need is important. I think there is some potential that a federal moratorium will be extended, if not from January 1st, then likely from January 20th. But at the end of that period, regardless of how it's implemented, if renters are left owing many months of rent, then they're going to need to be able to actually access additional funds to keep them housed. And I think it remains to be seen whether the federal government, whether Congress is willing to appropriate funds to provide emergency rental relief on the scale necessary. But if they do so, then mechanisms need to be in place that could actually distribute those funds quickly. So continuing to develop the means of doing so, I think, is really critically important. I was talking to a group in Minnesota a couple weeks ago where they've got a ton of money that was provided by the state, and they've been struggling to actually distribute it to people because of the administrative burdens of doing so. And that sort of deadlock situation is disappointing and frustrating, I think, for a lot of people. Actually, this might be a question that Jeff could answer better than I can. But one of the things that we looked at a couple of months ago was the claim amounts that we're seeing in eviction filings. And we were able to do this in Harris County, in Cincinnati, and in Phoenix. And back then, the numbers were looking pretty stable. I think this was September. We weren't seeing a big jump in how much people owed when eviction cases were being brought. And when Renee and I looked at that again earlier this week, it looked like those numbers were trending up pretty fast. Jeff, does that line up with what you're seeing?
I haven't done that research recently, so I'll break that down and report out to the group in a follow-up. I wouldn't be surprised though.
I mean, the number that you were posted on that in your interface, it looked like it was above 3,000 was the average since November 1st.
Well, then that would be the case, yeah.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, as that number continues to go up, that's going to be more and more difficult to cure those cases. So having the means of doing so, I think, is really important.
It looks like we have one question, one hand raised, so I'm going to unmute you so you can ask your question.
Yeah, I'm interested in situating this in perhaps a broader or different context. I'm clear on Houston falling in that middle tier of cities when it comes to percentage of historical evictions. I'm also curious about thinking about Houston compared to other cities in terms of the rates of eviction generally. So understanding, if Houston is at 40 to 60% of historical evictions, is that 40 to 60% a good number given how Houston historically compares to other cities in terms of overall rates of eviction? So, and I ask this because this is an urgent and emergent issue that we're dealing with, but it's also situated within a larger historical context, and eventually the pandemic will be over. So the question is, if we find ourselves at 100% of historical rates of eviction over the past 20 years, is that acceptable? Is that good? How does that compare to other cities? And what might we set as benchmarks or goals in terms of pushing down those rates of eviction?
Yeah, that's a great question. The last year in which the Eviction Lab has good data for Harris County is 2015, where we calculate that the county has an eviction rate of 3.6%, which is 1.25 percentage points above the national average. Harris County absolutely deals with an absolutely large number of eviction cases every year, and the eviction rate in the county is considerably above the national average. Now, there are cities, especially cities in the Carolinas, in Virginia, in Georgia, that have eviction rates as high as 8, 9, 10% annually. I mean, it's kind of horrifying to contemplate.
I wonder what dynamics might be driving that too.
Yeah, I mean, in many of those places, landlord-tenant court is absolutely the kind of first recourse that landlords look to when resolving issues with tenants. Filings are often very cheap, and the courts are set up such that landlords don't necessarily need to have lawyers, that hearings are scheduled very quickly. Basically a whole range of steps that make the eviction process cheap and easy for landlords to use.
And I think that kind of speaks to the question that I posed earlier about really motivating or incentivizing participation on the part of judges and on the part of landlords, to Donna's point, in this process. To what extent do we use kind of an appeal to morality and framing it as a moral issue to incentivize recalcitrant judges and landlords to participate?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and so to your second point about which is I think more kind of what can be done, what should be done longer term to bring these rates down. I think in right now we see a willingness to reconsider how in many sites to reconsider how the eviction process is used and what role landlord tenant courts should have in serving as an interface between landlords and their tenants. I think steps that do make the eviction process slower or more difficult for landlords could be helpful. I think we've seen really promising moves toward eviction diversion programs in a number of the cities that we're monitoring. Milwaukee has made strides in that direction. As I mentioned, St. Louis has done likewise. If possible, if these are programs that could be institutionalized moving forward, where we can take advantage of the current sort of moment of crisis to establish a system that has lasting benefits to tenants, that's sort of making the most of the pandemic. That would be ideal.
Great, thanks. Any other questions or comments for Peter before we shift to kind of going over the remaining work we've got?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I have to attend a parent-teacher conference, so I'm going to hop off. But
okay,
thanks.
terrific,
If you have any
Peter.
questions, don't
Thanks,
hesitate to email. Bye.
And we'll send away your slides. Thanks. Okay, I will turn it over to Elaine.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to run through these slides as soon as possible. This morning, we just wanted to provide an update of where we were with our current work streams of the task force. On the responding to immediate requests from city or county leadership, our plan for the biweekly data snapshots is that thanks to both January advisors and the eviction lab, we have open source data of what's going on right now, and we are able to summarize and track those points for the county in comparison with other jurisdictions. We plan to initiate a biweekly call with the task force members that interact with the court system to gather qualitative data from the courts. I want to highlight that Texas Housers have launched the Houston Eviction Solidarity Network with volunteers to watch the courts and could provide potentially some of this information, as well as Lone Star and other legal partners. On the monthly reports on housing stability, we believe this is important for the county long-term. So we plan to kick off a data committee to determine the metrics and data needs for these reports, and hope that these reports will keep the commissioner's court updated and informed on policy or programmatic responses to the housing stability crisis, not only during COVID, but long-term. On the national practice research recommendations, we are going to convene a policy feedback team to recommend policy priorities to the task force from this national policy scan that we are working on. And these hopefully will inform the task force state and local policy recommendations. With the work group facilitators will gather recommendations by December the 4th. The Access to Justice and Rent Assistance work group will wrap up work before December 4th, and the Landlord and Property Stabilization work group will provide preliminary recommendations. These are some of the Rent Assistance group preliminary recommendations. We are going to share these slides later on for you to read through, and we are going to share the work group recommendations in detail before our December 4th meeting for you to review and provide potential comments on. These align with the principles we have developed initially and have added on from other jurisdictions that are facing challenges, and you'll receive these via email as well. Any comments are appreciated and can be sent to Martha McCreary. On the Access to Justice group, we also have some recommendations, and they are gathering feedback from the work group till in November 30th. So these are also going to be sent out to you, and the work group will share their recommendations with the full task force. I want to use my time with the Landlord and Property Stabilization Work Group. They are, in the third meeting is scheduled for next week, and they are already have a definition of small and medium-sized landlords. They are going to have a workshop next week, and some of the discussions they've been having is what are potential programs that can assist small landlords and therefore keep tenants housed. Some of the points heard were that direct cash assistance to renters helps landlords, that an expansion on HUD Section 8 would be helpful, access to low interest lines of credit and low interest source of refinancing are helpful too for small landlords, that additional resources are needed by landlords that did not already have strong relationships with local banks. There was some discussion about future bills that could impact lower or managed real estate tax assessments, and to extend the homestead exemption for rental units with long-term tenants. And they are flagging that insurance rates have risen and relief would help locally for that. In the next step, they're meeting next week, and the goal of the workshop would be to develop an outline of a landlord property support initiative to be reviewed by task force members and later on be submitted along with our recommendations. We have a quick update from the pilot initiatives that we're working on the landlord facilitation project. 3 CBOs, community-based organizations are engaged, the Alliance, Memorial Assistance Ministries, and Wesley Community Center. The facilitators have been trained on the legal aspects of eviction, fundamentals of facilitation, review of facilitation skills, and the components of these different types of facilitated conversations between tenants and landlords. And there are going to be weekly meetings with the agencies to track the pilot challenges and successes. And we hope to share the lessons learned on how this can be an early dispute resolution method and distribution of rent assistance to tenants at risk. We are going to continue our bi-weekly meetings. The last meeting for this year will be on December the 18th, and we'll reconvene in January 8th. The presentations will focus on national best practices and information sharing, starting today with the Eviction Lab. And please let us know if there's someone you would like to hear from. These are some of the presentations we've had in the past, and you can access them on our website. So any updates and these recordings of this meeting are available there as well. Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Elaine. Any questions of Elaine before we begin to wrap up?
The other thing, I don't know if Chriselle is still on the line, but I know that the Home Coalition and some other organizations are working on an eviction defense campaign and are also recruiting volunteers for that. So Chriselle, if you have more information, please share with Claire or in the chat, and we'll incorporate in our follow-up email.
You know, she sent it in the chat. Chriselle, do you want to give any additional context?
Sure. So yeah, I placed the Zoom registration in the chat today. We had our first one on Monday, and it went extremely well. We were able actually to communicate with, I think it was over 900 tenants. So yeah, if you want to kind of hear what folks are dealing with firsthand and try to direct them to resources, I would highly recommend, signing up. But ultimately, we just want to, create a place where folks can go and find like one-stop information. So feel free to sign up there.
Great. Okay, well, with that, just one piece I thought people would enjoy knowing is that you all may remember that Erica Prothing from the Urban Institute was one of our early presenters. And for those that pay careful attention to these kind of things, you might be interested in knowing that she is the chair of the committee that is focusing on HUD for the transition work team. Obviously, their business is a little bit harder as a result of the GSA not yet having given the green light, but nevertheless, I think it's encouraging that we're going to have somebody who is as focused on wanting to keep people stable in their housing, leading one of the most critical agency transitions. So that's an exciting thing for us. With that, maybe just see if Rick and Jeremy have anything to add before we wish everybody a wonderful weekend and a happy Thanksgiving holiday. Rick, Jeremy, or an unmute them, Claire, and let them, hold on just a second, Claire, will unmute you.
I think I'm good. I appreciate all the great presentations today. A lot of good information, and I just wish everybody happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving as well. Thank you all. Thank you all
Thanks.
for being with us.
All right, have a nice weekend and a happy holiday, everyone.